The sky split open like a ripped seam, and Evelyn Victoria knew she had made a terrible mistake. She had been warned about the arroyos, those deceptive dry riverbeds that crisscrossed the New Mexico territory like scars on weathered leather. But she was new to this unforgiving land and thought herself careful enough. Now, as she stood ankle-deep in water that had materialized from nothing in the span of mere minutes, watching the muddy torrent swell around her wagon wheels, she understood why the shopkeeper in Sloan had looked at her with such concern when she mentioned taking the southern route alone. The year was 1876, and Evelyn had traveled from Boston 3 weeks prior, carrying nothing but her late aunt's inheritance, a wagon full of books, and dreams of opening a school in the growing frontier town. At 22, she had been called foolish by her relatives, reckless by her friends, but she had felt only determination. The East had nothing left for her but memories of a broken engagement and whispers behind gloved hands. The West promised reinvention. The water was at her knees now, cold and insistent, pulling at her heavy skirts with invisible hands. The 2 horses hitched to her wagon screamed their terror, eyes rolling white as they struggled against their traces. Evelyn gripped the wagon seat, her knuckles bone white against the weathered wood, and tried to remember the prayers her mother had taught her as a child. She did not hear the hoofbeats over the roar of rushing water. She did not see the rider until he was nearly upon her, his horse plunging through the churning flood with muscular grace. The man sat tall in his saddle, his dark hat pulled low against the driving rain that had begun to fall, and for a moment Evelyn thought she might be hallucinating, conjuring salvation from desperation. "Cut the horses loose." His voice was deep and commanding, barely audible over the chaos. "Cut them now." Evelyn stared at him, water now at her thighs, her brain struggling to process his words through her panic. The cowboy did not wait for her compliance. He urged his horse closer, close enough that she could see his face beneath the hat brim, angular and sun-darkened, his jaw set with determination. Without hesitation, he pulled a knife from his belt and leaned dangerously from his saddle, slashing through the leather traces that bound her horses to certain death. The animals bolted immediately, finding their footing on higher ground and disappearing into the gray curtain of rain. Evelyn felt the wagon shift beneath her, the current catching it now that the horse's weight no longer anchored it in place. "Jump!" the cowboy shouted, extending his arm toward her. "Now, before it tips." But Evelyn hesitated, thinking of her books, her careful plans, everything she owned in the world contained in that wagon. The hesitation nearly cost her life. The wagon lurched sideways, tilting as the water found its center of gravity and began to roll it like a child's toy. She did not jump. She fell. The water swallowed her whole, cold and absolute, filling her nose and mouth before she could draw breath. Her heavy skirts became anchors, dragging her down as surely as if she had tied stones to her ankles. She could not tell which way was up, could not breathe, could not think beyond the primal terror of drowning. Then there were hands on her, strong and sure, gripping her arm with enough force to bruise. She broke the surface gasping, choking, her lungs burning. The cowboy had dismounted, standing braced against the current, one arm locked around her waist as he fought to keep them both upright. "Hold on to me," he commanded, and this time Evelyn obeyed without thought, wrapping her arms around his neck as he half carried, half dragged her through the surging water toward higher ground. She would never clearly remember those next few minutes. There was only the desperate struggle, the burning in her chest, the iron strength of the man who refused to let the flood take her. Her feet found purchase on rock, then sand, then finally blessed dry earth as he hauled her up the embankment and onto solid ground. They collapsed together, Evelyn on her hands and knees, coughing up what felt like half the river while the cowboy knelt beside her, breathing hard. The rain continued to fall in sheets, but they were safe, watching from 20 feet above as the flash flood roared through the arroyo below, carrying with it Evelyn's wagon, her belongings, her carefully packed books, everything tumbling and breaking apart in the churning brown water. "My things," she whispered, her voice raw. "Things can be replaced," the cowboy said, his voice still slightly breathless. "You cannot." Evelyn turned to look at him properly for the first time. He was younger than his commanding presence suggested, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain and eyes that were an unexpected shade of green, like new spring grass. His face was all hard angles and weathered skin, but there was kindness in those eyes, genuine concern as he studied her. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I think so," Evelyn managed, though in truth she was not certain she could stand, let alone sit a horse. He must have seen the doubt in her face because he nodded and stood, offering her his hand. "My name is Yates Turner. My ranch is about 3 miles northeast of here. Can you make it that far?" "Evelyn Victoria," she replied automatically, taking his hand and letting him pull her to her feet. Her legs trembled beneath her, weak as a newborn foal's. "I can make it." She was lying, and they both knew it, but Yates Turner had the grace not to say so. Instead, he whistled sharply, and his horse, a magnificent bay gelding, picked its way carefully up the embankment to them. The animal was well trained, standing rock-steady as Yates helped Evelyn into the saddle before swinging up behind her. "Just lean back," he said quietly, his arm coming around her waist to hold her secure. "I have got you." And despite everything, despite being a stranger in a strange land who had just lost everything she owned, Evelyn found herself believing him. She let herself lean back against his solid chest, felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, and closed her eyes as exhaustion crashed over her like a second wave. The ride to the Turner ranch passed in a blur of rain and fatigue. Evelyn drifted in and out of awareness, always brought back by the steady presence of the man behind her, his arm keeping her safe, his voice occasionally murmuring reassurances she could not quite make out over the storm. When they finally arrived, full dark had fallen, though it could not have been much past mid-afternoon. The ranch house materialized from the gloom like a blessing, a low adobe structure with warm light glowing from its windows. Yates dismounted first, then lifted Evelyn down as though she weighed nothing, catching her when her legs buckled beneath her. "Easy now," he said, and swept her up into his arms before she could protest. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a weathered Mexican woman in her 50s whose eyes went wide at the sight of them. "Madre de Dios," she exclaimed. "Yates, what has happened?" "Flash flood in the South Arroyo, Rosa," Yates replied, carrying Evelyn through the doorway and into the warmth beyond. "She needs dry clothes, hot food, and probably a bed. Can you help her while I tend to Santiago?" Of course," Rosa said, her capable hands already reaching for Evelyn. "You poor child. Come, let us get you out of these wet things before you catch your death." Evelyn wanted to protest, to insist she could manage herself, but her body had other ideas. She let Rosa guide her to what appeared to be a guest room, let the older woman help her peel off the sodden layers of her ruined traveling dress, let herself be wrapped in a thick quilt that smelled of sage and sunshine. "That boy," Rosa muttered, more to herself than to Evelyn as she worked. "Always finding someone or something to rescue. Last month it was an orphaned calf. Month before that, a dog that had been shot. Now a beautiful young woman from the flood. His heart is too big for this hard land. He saved my life, Evelyn said, her teeth chattering despite the quilt. Of course he did, Rosa replied, as if there had never been any doubt. Now drink this. She pressed a cup of something hot and aromatic into Evelyn's hands. Evelyn sipped cautiously and tasted chamomile honey, and something else she could not identify but which spread warmth through her chest like liquid sunlight. "Thank you," she managed. "I am sorry to be such trouble." Rosa made a dismissive noise. Trouble is when the cattle break through the fence. Trouble is when the well runs dry. A woman who needs help is not trouble. She is an opportunity for kindness. Tears suddenly stung Evelyn's eyes, the first tears she had allowed herself since watching her wagon disappear into the flood. Rosa saw them and made a soft, sympathetic sound, gathering Evelyn against her ample bosom like a child. "There now," she murmured. "You cry if you need to. You have had a terrible fright. But you are safe now. Yates will not let anything happen to you." And somehow, that simple assurance from this stranger was enough. Evelyn cried great shuddering sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul, mourning not just her lost possessions, but everything she had left behind, everything she had hoped for, the sheer, overwhelming terror of nearly dying alone in a strange land. Rosa held her through it all, rocking slightly, murmuring Spanish endearments Evelyn did not understand but which comforted nonetheless. When the storm of emotion finally passed, leaving Evelyn hollow and exhausted, Rosa tucked her into the bed as tenderly as any mother. "Sleep now," she said. "Everything will look better in the morning. It always does." Evelyn wanted to stay awake, to properly thank her rescuer, to figure out what she was going to do now, but sleep pulled at her with irresistible force. Her last conscious thought was of strong arms holding her safe and green eyes full of concern. She slept without dreaming. When Evelyn woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, so bright it hurt her eyes. For a moment she could not remember where she was, knew only that something terrible had happened. Then it all came rushing back. The flood, the terror, the cowboy who had saved her life. She sat up slowly, her body aching in places she had not known could ache. Someone had left clothes folded neatly on the chair beside the bed. A simple cotton dress in pale blue, undergarments, even stockings. They were worn but clean, and when Evelyn held the dress up, she was surprised to find it would probably fit reasonably well. Dressing took longer than it should have, her muscles protesting every movement. When she finally emerged from the guest room, she found herself in a long hallway that opened into a larger main room with whitewashed walls, exposed wooden beams, and furniture that was simple but well made. The room was empty, but she could hear voices coming from outside, along with the sound of chickens and the lowing of cattle. She found Rosa in the kitchen, a separate structure connected to the main house by a covered walkway, stirring something in a large pot that smelled like heaven. "Ah, you are awake," Rosa said, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Good, you have slept for 14 hours. Your body needed it." 14 hours. Evelyn was stunned. She never slept past dawn, not even when she had been ill. "You nearly drowned, child. Your body was in shock. Sit, sit. I will get you some breakfast." Evelyn sat at the rough wooden table, feeling awkward and uncertain. "I should thank Mr. Turner properly. Is he here?" "He is out checking the south pasture, making sure the flood did not damage the fencing. He will be back by noon." Rosa set a bowl of something that looked like porridge but smelled spiced and rich in front of Evelyn, along with a thick slice of bread still warm from the oven. "Eat first. Then we will worry about thanks." The food was delicious, and Evelyn found herself ravenously hungry, eating with an enthusiasm that would have scandalized her Boston relatives. Rosa watched with approval, refilling her bowl without being asked. "Yates said you were headed to Sloan," Rosa said as Evelyn ate. "What business did you have there?" "I was going to open a school," Evelyn replied, then felt her throat tighten. "I had books, primers, everything I needed. All of it is gone now." Rosa made a thoughtful sound. "Sloan could use a school. The children there run wild. No education beyond what their parents can teach them. If you can still teach without books, there would be families willing to pay." "I suppose I could," Evelyn said slowly, though the thought of starting over with nothing was daunting. "But I have no money now for rent, no supplies, nothing. Everything I had was in that wagon." "Then perhaps you stay here for a while," Rosa suggested. "Help me around the house, earn your keep while you figure out your next steps. Yates would not mind. He is generous to a fault." Evelyn was about to respond when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Through the kitchen window, she saw Yates Turner riding into the yard, his hat shading his face from the bright sun. Even from a distance, she could see the easy confidence with which he sat his horse, the natural grace of a man completely at home in his environment. He dismounted smoothly, speaking to another ranch hand Evelyn had not seen before, a young Mexican man who took the reins with a grin and led the horse away toward the barn. Yates pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, and Evelyn felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her near drowning the day before. She stood quickly, smoothing down her borrowed dress. "I should thank him." Rosa smiled knowingly. "Yes, you should." Evelyn found Yates at the well, drinking from a dipper with the unself-conscious thirst of a man who had been working in the sun. He looked up as she approached, and a slow smile spread across his face, transforming the stern angles into something warmer. "Miss Victoria," he said, straightening. "I am glad to see you up and about. How are you feeling?" "Sore but alive, thanks to you," Evelyn replied. Now that she was standing in front of him, her carefully rehearsed speech of gratitude fled her mind. "I do not know how to properly thank you for what you did. You risked your life for a complete stranger." Yates shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "Any decent man would have done the same." "I do not think that is true," Evelyn said quietly. "But even if it were, it was you who did it. You saved my life, Mr. Turner, and I will never forget that." He met her eyes, and for a moment, something passed between them, an understanding or recognition that Evelyn could not quite name but felt nonetheless. "You are welcome," he said simply. "And please call me Yates. We are not much for formality out here." "Then you must call me Evelyn." He nodded, a slight smile still playing at the corners of his mouth. "Rosa said you were planning to open a school in Sloan." "I was," Evelyn confirmed, "though I am not sure how I will manage it now. Everything I had was in that wagon." Yates frowned, considering. "I rode down to the arroyo this morning after the water receded. There was not much left, I am afraid. The wagon was smashed to pieces. But I did find this." He walked over to the porch, where Evelyn now noticed a saddle blanket bundled around something. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a single book, waterlogged and swollen but intact. It was her copy of Shakespeare's collected works, the one her father had given her before he died. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh," she breathed, taking the book with trembling hands. "Oh, I thought everything was lost." "It was wedged between some rocks about half a mile downstream," Yates said. "I figured if it survived that journey, it was meant to be saved." Tears pricked Evelyn's eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than grief. She clutched the book to her chest, not caring that it was still damp, that the pages were warped beyond repair. It was a piece of her father, a connection to who she had been, who she hoped to become. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You cannot know what this means to me." Yates looked at her with those green eyes, and Evelyn felt something shift inside her, something fundamental and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I should let you rest," he said after a moment. "Rosa mentioned you might stay on for a while, help her around the house. You are welcome to for as long as you need. No obligation." "That is very generous," Evelyn said, "but I could not impose without contributing properly. Perhaps I could teach. Rosa mentioned there are ranch hands with children." Yates's expression brightened. "Diego has 3 little ones and Miguel's wife just had a baby last year. There are others in the area too. If you are serious about teaching, I could spread the word. We have a bunkhouse that is not being used. It could be converted into a schoolroom easily enough. You would do that?" Evelyn asked, surprised. "Why not?" Yates replied. "Like you said, the children need education, and it would be nice to have something good come out of yesterday's disaster." Over the following days, Evelyn found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. She helped Rosa with cooking and cleaning, learning to make tortillas and beans and the spiced coffee that seemed to be a staple. In the afternoons, she worked with Yates to transform the empty bunkhouse into a proper schoolroom, sweeping out dust and debris, whitewashing the walls, building simple desks from rough lumber. They worked well together, Evelyn discovered. Yates was patient with her lack of practical skills, showing her how to properly hammer a nail, how to measure and cut wood without wasting material. In turn, she found herself telling him about Boston, about literature and poetry, about the world beyond the New Mexico territory. "You must think this life is very rough," he said one afternoon as they took a break from their work, sitting on the porch of the bunkhouse and drinking cool water from a shared canteen. "Different," Evelyn corrected. "Not rough, just different from what I knew. Do you miss it? The East?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. "I miss some things. Good bookstores, theater. My parents, though they have been gone for some years now, but I do not miss the life I was living there." "What life was that?" She hesitated, then decided honesty was owed to the man who had saved her. "I was engaged to be married. He was a banker, very respectable, very proper. He also had a mistress he had no intention of giving up after our wedding. When I confronted him, he acted as though I was being childish for objecting. As though that was simply how things were done among people of quality." Yates's jaw tightened. "He sounds like a fool." "Yes," Evelyn agreed, "but I was the bigger fool for not seeing it sooner. I thought I loved him. Now I realize I loved the idea of him, the stability he represented. I did not love the man himself. And now I want to build something of my own, something real, something that matters." Yates nodded slowly. "I understand that. It is why I came west 10 years ago. My father wanted me to take over his shipping business in Missouri, follow the path he had laid out for me. But I wanted land, open sky, something I could build with my own hands rather than inheriting it. Was your father angry, disappointed, I think, but he came to understand eventually. He visited once, before he died, told me he was proud of what I had built, even if it was not what he had wanted for me." Yates's expression softened with memory. "That meant more to me than any inheritance could have." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, passing the canteen back and forth, watching the sun paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said finally. "Of course. Why were you out there? At the arroyo, I mean." "It seemed too fortunate to be simple chance." Yates smiled slightly. "Rosa would say it was fate. I was actually looking for a missing calf. One of the young ones had wandered off from the herd and I was worried it might get caught in the flood. I never found the calf, but I found you instead." "Do you think Rosa is right? About fate?" He looked at her, and Evelyn felt her breath catch at the intensity in his eyes. "I am starting to think she might be." The schoolroom was finished within a week, and word spread quickly through the surrounding ranches and homesteads. Within days, Evelyn had 8 students ranging in age from 5 to 13, the children of ranch hands and farmers who were hungry for the education their parents could not provide. Evelyn threw herself into teaching with a passion that surprised even her. Without proper textbooks, she taught from memory and imagination, telling stories from literature and history, teaching arithmetic through practical problems the children could understand. She borrowed Yates's maps to teach geography, used Rosa's kitchen to demonstrate scientific principles, turned every aspect of ranch life into a lesson. The children adored her, and their parents were grateful beyond words. They paid what they could, sometimes in coins, more often in goods. Fresh eggs, vegetables from kitchen gardens, a jar of precious honey, a beautifully woven blanket. Evelyn accepted it all with grace, understanding that in this place such gifts represented real sacrifice. Yates often stopped by the schoolroom during the day, ostensibly to check on repairs or bring water for the students, but Evelyn suspected he simply liked to listen. She would catch him leaning in the doorway, a slight smile on his face as she guided the children through a reading lesson or helped them work through arithmetic problems. One evening, after the children had gone home and Evelyn was cleaning up, Yates appeared with 2 horses saddled. "You have been working hard," he said. "I thought you might like to see the ranch properly. The sunset from the North Ridge is something special." Evelyn hesitated only a moment before accepting. She had been on the ranch for 3 weeks now, but had seen little beyond the immediate area of the house and school. And if she was honest with herself, she had been hoping for more time alone with Yates, whose presence had become the highlight of her days. They rode out together, Evelyn on a gentle mare named Bonita, Yates on his bay gelding Santiago. The evening was perfect, the heat of the day fading into pleasant warmth, the sky beginning to paint itself in brilliant colors. Yates led her up a winding trail to a ridge that overlooked the entire ranch. Below them, the land spread out like a patchwork quilt. Green pastures dotted with cattle, the silver thread of a creek, the adobe buildings looking small and perfect in the distance. "This is beautiful," Evelyn breathed, taking it all in. "This is why I stay," Yates said simply. "On hard days when nothing goes right, I come up here and remember what I am working for." They dismounted and sat on the sun-warmed rocks, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Evelyn was intensely aware of Yates beside her, the solid warmth of him, the way the fading light caught in his dark hair. "Can I ask you something personal?" Yates said after a while. "Of course. Why did you really come west? I know about the broken engagement, but you could have stayed in Boston, built a life there. You did not have to come all this way alone." Evelyn thought about the question, wanting to answer honestly. "I felt suffocated there. Every choice had already been made for me. Who I would marry, how I would live, what I was allowed to want. Out here, I get to decide. Even losing everything in that flood, even starting over with nothing, I still have more freedom than I ever had in Boston. You do not regret it." She turned to look at him, this man who had saved her life, who had given her shelter and purpose and kindness without asking anything in return. "No," she said softly. "I do not regret it at all." Their eyes met and held. Evelyn saw Yates's hand move slightly, as though he was going to reach for hers, then hesitate. She made the decision for both of them, sliding her hand across the small distance between them and lacing her fingers through his. His hand was warm and calloused, strong from years of ranch work, and it felt exactly right wrapped around hers. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I have been trying to figure out the right way to say this for weeks now, and I do not think there is a right way, so I am just going to say it plain. I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the moment I pulled you out of that flood. I know it is fast, and I know you have been through a lot, and I do not want to take advantage of your situation here. But I could not let another day go by without telling you the truth. Evelyn's heart was hammering so hard she thought he must surely be able to hear it. Yates, she began, then stopped, not sure how to put her feelings into words. You do not have to say anything, he said quickly. I just needed you to know. Whatever you decide, you will always have a place here. The school, your room, it is all yours for as long as you want it, regardless of anything else. Yates, she said again, more firmly this time. Let me finish. He fell silent, watching her with those green eyes that had haunted her dreams since the day they met. I am falling in love with you too, she said, the words coming easier than she had expected. I think I started falling that first day when you risked yourself to save me. Every day since then, I have fallen a little more. The way you are with the children, the way you treat your workers with respect, the way you look at the land like it is something precious, the way you look at me. How do I look at you? His voice was barely above a whisper. Like I matter, she said simply. Like I am someone worth saving. Yates lifted his free hand to her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. You are, he said. You are worth saving and worth knowing and worth loving. You are remarkable, Evelyn Victoria. Then he was kissing her, soft and careful at first, as though she might break. But Evelyn had survived a flash flood and crossed a continent alone. She was not fragile. She kissed him back with all the passion she had been holding in check for weeks, pouring everything she felt into that moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, the sun had set fully, leaving them in the soft purple twilight. I suppose we should head back before Rosa sends out a search party, Yates said, though he made no move to stand. I suppose we should, Evelyn agreed, equally reluctant to let the moment end. They rode back slowly, their horses walking side by side, their hands joined between them. When they reached the ranch, Rosa took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly but said nothing, simply served them dinner and left them alone on the porch afterward. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing, learning each other in the way new lovers do. Yates told her about building the ranch from nothing, about the years of hard work and setbacks and small triumphs. Evelyn told him about her childhood, her parents' deaths, her dreams of making a difference in the world. You are making a difference, Yates said. Those children worship you. Their parents talk about what their sons and daughters are learning. You have given them hope for a better future. It is not enough, Evelyn said. I want to do more. The schoolroom is already too small. There are children from farther out who cannot come because it is too far to ride every day. What if we built a bigger school, Yates suggested, in Sloan proper, a real schoolhouse big enough for all the children in the area? That would cost money we do not have. I have some money saved, Yates said. And I bet if we talked to the other ranchers, the merchants in town, we could raise more. People invest in what they believe in. Evelyn looked at him, this man who was already changing her life in ways she could never have imagined. You would do that? I would do anything for you, he said simply, and she knew he meant it. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Yates began talking to neighbors and townspeople about the school. To Evelyn's amazement, the response was overwhelming. Everyone, it seemed, recognized the need for proper education in the growing town. The mayor of Sloan, a former prospector named Gerald Hughes who had struck it rich and invested in the town's future, donated the land. Local ranchers contributed lumber and labor. The merchants gave money and materials. Even the saloon owner, a gruff woman named Martha who had lived in Sloane since it was nothing but a trading post, contributed generously. "My daughter never learned to read proper," she told Evelyn when she pressed a surprisingly large sum into her hands. "I do not want other children growing up the same way." Construction began in early October, and by December, the new schoolhouse stood proud on Main Street, a real building with glass windows, a wood stove for heat, rows of proper desks, and even a small library of books that had been donated or purchased with the remaining funds. Through it all, Evelyn and Yates grew closer. They were careful to maintain propriety, mindful of the conservative community they lived in, but everyone could see the way they looked at each other, the way they fit together like two pieces of a puzzle finally joined. Rosa, watching them with maternal satisfaction, finally cornered Yates one evening in the kitchen. "When are you going to marry that girl?" she demanded. Yates had the grace to look sheepish. "I have been thinking about it. Yates Turner, that woman is perfect for you. She is smart, she is kind, she loves this land almost as much as you do." "What are you waiting for?" "I want to do it right," Yates said. "She deserves something special, not just a rushed proposal." "That girl nearly died in a flood and lost everything she owned," Rosa said tartly. "I think she would appreciate honesty more than grand gestures. But if you want to make it special, I might have an idea." The schoolhouse was set to open officially in January of 1877, with a celebration for the whole town. Rosa suggested that Yates propose at the celebration, in front of everyone who had helped make Evelyn's dream a reality. At first, Yates was not sure. Evelyn was private in many ways, not given to public displays, but the more he thought about it, the more it felt right. The school represented their shared vision for the future. What better place to ask her to share that future permanently? He ordered a ring from Santa Fe, a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing ostentatious but beautiful in its simplicity. He practiced what he would say, though he knew that when the moment came, he would probably forget every carefully chosen word and speak from his heart instead. The morning of the opening celebration dawned clear and cold, the kind of perfect winter day that made the New Mexico sky look impossibly blue. The entire town turned out, families traveling from miles around to see the new school and celebrate its opening. Evelyn was radiant, wearing a new dress that Rosa had sewn in secret, deep green wool that brought out the color in her eyes. She gave tours of the schoolroom, showing off the books and maps and supplies with the pride of a new mother showing off her baby. Yates watched her, his heart so full he thought it might burst. This woman, this remarkable, brave, beautiful woman had chosen him, chosen this life, chosen to build something meaningful in this hard land. He could not believe his fortune. When the mayor called for everyone's attention to give a speech, Yates knew his moment had come. His palms were sweating, and his heart was racing faster than it had even during the flash flood that had brought Evelyn into his life. The mayor finished his speech, and before anyone else could start talking, Yates stepped forward. "If I could have everyone's attention for just another moment," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. The gathered townspeople fell quiet, looking at him with curiosity. Evelyn, standing near the front, looked puzzled. "We are here today to celebrate this schoolhouse and the woman who made it possible," Yates began. "Evelyn Victoria came to our town with nothing but dreams and determination. She lost everything in a flash flood last summer, but she did not give up. She built something beautiful from that disaster, gave our children a gift that will last generations." He paused, pulling the ring from his pocket and turning to face Evelyn directly. Her eyes went wide as she realized what was happening. "Evelyn," he said, his voice softer now but still audible in the quiet. "You swept into my life like that flood, turning everything upside down in the best possible way. You have made me believe in futures I never dared to imagine. You have given me hope and joy and purpose beyond this ranch I built. I saved you from the flood, but in return, you saved me from a life only half lived." He dropped to one knee, holding up the ring. Around them, the crowd had begun to murmur with excitement, but Yates only had eyes for Evelyn, who had tears streaming down her face. "Will you marry me?" he asked simply. "Will you build this future with me, side by side, for all our days?" For a moment that felt like an eternity, Evelyn just stared at him. Then she laughed, a bright, joyous sound that rang out across the schoolyard. "Yes," she said, moving toward him. "Yes, of course, yes." The crowd erupted in cheers as Yates stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her soundly. Propriety be damned. Evelyn kissed him back, laughing and crying at the same time, and Yates thought he had never been happier in his entire life. They were married a month later, in February of 1877, in a simple ceremony at the ranch with Rosa and the ranch hands and half the town in attendance. Evelyn wore a cream-colored dress that Rosa and several of the ranch wives had sewn together, working in secret for weeks. Yates wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed until it was nearly respectable. The ceremony was performed by a traveling preacher who made a circuit through the territory, and though it was simple, it was perfect. When Yates kissed his bride, sealing their vows before God and community, he felt a sense of rightness so profound it made his throat tight with emotion. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with food and music and dancing under the stars. Evelyn danced with Yates, with Rosa, with her students, with the ranchers and townspeople who had become her new family. She was glowing with happiness, more beautiful than Yates had ever seen her. Happy. He murmured when they finally stole a moment alone, escaping the party to stand in the quiet darkness beyond the house. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Evelyn replied, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "A year ago, I was in Boston, trapped in a life that was slowly suffocating me. Now I am here, married to a man I love beyond reason, doing work that matters. It feels like a dream." "If it is a dream, I never want to wake up," Yates said, and kissed her again, slow and sweet and full of promise. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Running a ranch and a school simultaneously was demanding work, and there were times when both of them fell into bed exhausted, too tired even to talk. But they were happy, building their life together one day at a time. The school thrived under Evelyn's dedicated teaching. Her students progressed rapidly, many learning to read and write within the first year. Several of the older children showed such promise that Evelyn began teaching them more advanced subjects, preparing them for the possibility of further education. Yates's ranch also prospered. He and Evelyn made a good team, bringing different strengths to their partnership. Where Yates understood the land and livestock, Evelyn had a head for numbers and organization. Together, they expanded the ranch's operations, buying more land and cattle, hiring additional hands. Rosa watched over them both with maternal pride, scolding them when they worked too hard, feeding them when they forgot to eat, offering wisdom when they needed guidance. She had become like a mother to Evelyn, who had lost her own parents years before, and she delighted in this role. In the summer of 1878, Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening after dinner, pulling him aside with a nervousness he had rarely seen in her. "I need to tell you something," she said, twisting her hands together. Yates immediately looked concerned. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. At least, I do not think anything is wrong. I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Yates just stared at her, processing the information. Then a smile spread across his face, wide and joyous and full of wonder. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby," Evelyn nodded, her own smile breaking through. "In early spring, Rosa thinks. Are you happy?" Instead of answering, Yates swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. When he set her down, he kept his arms around her, looking at her with such love it made her chest ache. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said. "You are giving me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I love you so much, Evelyn Turner." "I love you too," she replied. And they stood there in the fading light, holding each other and imagining the future that was taking shape inside her. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though it became increasingly difficult for Evelyn to manage the physical demands of teaching as she grew larger. The townspeople, protective of their beloved teacher, insisted she take time to rest. Several of the mothers with education stepped in to help with the younger students, giving Evelyn time to prepare for the baby's arrival. Rosa went into full grandmother mode, clucking over Evelyn constantly, making sure she ate properly and rested enough. Yates was equally protective, hovering so much that Evelyn finally had to gently tell him to give her some space to breathe. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she teased one evening when he tried to stop her from reaching for a book on a high shelf. "I know," Yates said sheepishly. "I just want to make sure you are safe, you and the baby both." Evelyn softened, taking his hand and placing it on her swollen belly. "We are safe. We are healthy. And this baby is lucky to have a father who cares so much already." In April of 1879, on a warm spring morning with wildflowers blooming across the ranch, Evelyn went into labor. Rosa sent for the midwife, a capable woman named Sarah who had delivered half the babies in the territory, and shooed Yates out of the bedroom despite his protests. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Yates wore a path in the floorboards pacing, deaf to Rosa's assurances that everything was progressing normally. He had never felt so helpless in his life, hearing Evelyn's cries of pain from behind the closed door and being unable to do anything to ease her suffering. Finally, just before dawn, a new sound joined Evelyn's exhausted breathing, the strong, angry cry of a newborn baby. Yates's knees went weak with relief. Rosa emerged a few minutes later, her face tired but beaming. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy with a good pair of lungs." "And Evelyn?" Yates asked urgently, tired but well. "Come meet your son." Yates entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Evelyn was propped up against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket that Rosa had knitted specially for this occasion. "Yates," Evelyn said softly, and her voice was full of wonder. "Come meet our son." Yates approached slowly, almost reverently. Evelyn pulled back the blanket, revealing a tiny, red-faced baby with a surprising amount of dark hair and a scrunched-up expression that suggested he was not entirely pleased with this new world he had entered. "He is perfect," Yates breathed, reaching out to touch the baby's incredibly small hand. The tiny fingers wrapped around his finger with surprising strength, and Yates felt something shift fundamentally inside him. This was his son, his child, a new generation, a new beginning. "What should we name him?" Evelyn asked. They had discussed names endlessly over the past months, but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at this tiny miracle, Yates knew exactly what felt right. "What do you think of James?" he suggested. "After my father, James Victor Turner." Evelyn smiled. "James Victor Turner, I love it." "Welcome to the world, James. Welcome home." The baby, as if in response, yawned widely and snuggled closer to his mother's warmth. Yates carefully sat on the edge of the bed, putting his arm around Evelyn and looking down at their son. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For this. For him. For choosing this life with me. For being brave enough to start over after losing everything. For loving me." Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. "I should be thanking you. You saved my life in that flood. Everything that came after, everything good, exists because you were there that day." "I think we saved each other," Yates said, and kissed the top of her head. The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a bright, curious boy who had his mother's intelligence and his father's love of the land. The ranch continued to prosper, and the school became one of the finest in the territory, with students coming from miles around to learn from the legendary Mrs. Turner. In 1881, Evelyn gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose, after the midwife who had delivered James and the roses that Yates had planted for Evelyn when they married. Sarah was quieter than her brother, thoughtful and observant, with her father's green eyes and a love of books that rivaled her mother's. 2 years later came another son, Thomas, who was fearless and adventurous from the moment he could crawl, giving his parents more scares before his 5th birthday than James and Sarah combined. The Turner family became a cornerstone of the community. Evelyn's school continued to grow, eventually requiring an additional teacher to handle all the students. Yates became a respected voice in territorial politics, advocating for education and fair treatment of all settlers regardless of their origin. Rosa remained with them, growing older but no less essential, ruling over the kitchen and the growing brood of Turner children with equal authority and love. She lived to see all 3 children grown, educated, and making their own marks on the world. James took over the ranch, bringing modern methods while respecting the traditions his father had established. Sarah became a teacher like her mother, eventually opening a school of her own in Santa Fe. Thomas, true to his adventurous nature, became a surveyor, mapping the territories as they transformed into states. Yates and Evelyn grew old together on the ranch they had built, watching the land change, watching New Mexico become a state, watching their children and grandchildren carry forward the values they had worked so hard to instill. On summer evenings, they would sit on the porch, hands clasped, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The view never got old, the wonder never faded. "You ever think about that day?" Evelyn asked one such evening when they were both well into their 60s. "The day of the flood, often," Yates replied. "It was the day my real life began." "Mine too," Evelyn agreed. "Strange how disaster can lead to such joy. If I had not lost everything in that flood, I might never have stayed. I might never have known this life, this love." "I would have found you eventually," Yates said with quiet certainty. "Somehow, somewhere, we were meant to find each other." "You sound like Rosa," Evelyn teased. "Rosa is a wise woman, always has been." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of companionship. Around them, the ranch hummed with activity. Grandchildren playing in the yard, cattle lowing in the distance, the sounds of a life well lived. "I have no regrets," Evelyn said finally. "Not a single one. Coming west, starting over, choosing you, it was all exactly right." Yates raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same tenderness he had shown 50 years before. "Neither do I. You swept me off my feet that day, Evelyn Turner, and I have been falling ever since." "We fell together," she corrected. "We built this together. Everything good came from both of us." "Then here is to building together," Yates said, "for all the years we have left." "For all the years we have left," Evelyn echoed, and they sat together watching the sun set on another perfect day, grateful for the flood that had brought them together, for the love that had sustained them, for the life they had built from disaster and determination. The Turner Ranch would remain in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose courage over comfort, love over safety. The school Evelyn founded still stands in Sloan, though it is now a historical landmark rather than an active schoolhouse. The story of the teacher from Boston and the cowboy who saved her became local legend, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best chapters. Yates Turner passed away in his sleep at the age of 83, his hand still clasped in Evelyn's, a peaceful end to a life well lived. Evelyn followed him 2 years later, having lived to see her youngest grandchild graduate from college, a feat that would have been impossible without the education she had worked so hard to provide. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains they had loved. Their headstone was simple, bearing their names, dates, and a single inscription chosen by their children. They built something beautiful. The legacy they left was not just in land or buildings, but in the generations of educated children who grew up to build and create and contribute. In the community that thrived because two people had chosen to invest in its future. In the love story that proved disaster could be the beginning rather than the end. Years later, their great-granddaughter would write a book about them, piecing together their story from letters and journals and family tales. The book would end with Evelyn's own words, written in her journal the night after Yates proposed. "I came west seeking freedom and found so much more. I found purpose, I found home, I found love. The flood took everything I brought with me, but in return it gave me everything I needed. I would not change a single moment, not even the terror of nearly drowning, because it led me here, to him, to this beautiful life we are building together. I have never been so grateful to have lost my way." And perhaps that was the real lesson of their story, that sometimes losing everything is not the end but the beginning. That sometimes the person who saves us is the one we end up saving in return. That love, real love, is not about grand gestures but about choosing each other, day after day, building something beautiful from whatever materials life provides. The flash flood that brought them together was violent and destructive, but it was also the catalyst for everything good that followed. Without it, Evelyn would have passed through Sloan and continued on to wherever her original plans had led. Yates would have continued his solitary life, successful but incomplete. Instead, the flood swept away the old and made space for the new. It took Evelyn's possessions but gave her a home. It endangered her life but led her to the man who would become her partner in all things. It destroyed her plans but opened the door to better ones. And in the end, is that not what love does? It sweeps away our careful plans and replaces them with something wilder, deeper, more real. It saves us from the floods we did not know we were drowning in, and gives us the courage to build something new. Yates saved Evelyn from the flood, but she saved him too, from a life lived only halfway, from loneliness masked as independence, from never knowing the profound joy of partnership and family. They swept each other off their feet, and together they built something that lasted long after they were gone, something beautiful and true and worth remembering. That is the story of how a cowboy saved a teacher from a flash flood, and how she swept him off his feet in return. It is a story of disaster transformed into destiny, of strangers becoming soulmates, of two people choosing courage and finding love. It is a story that happened in the Wild West, in the New Mexico territory, in a time when the land was hard and life was harder. But it is also a timeless story, one that could happen anywhere, anytime, whenever two people are brave enough to let disaster become opportunity. to let loss become gain, to let a moment of rescue become a lifetime of love. The Turner family still gathers every year on the anniversary of that flash flood, not to mourn what was lost, but to celebrate what was found. They tell the story to the youngest generation, keeping it alive, reminding them that their family began with an act of courage, a moment of kindness, a choice to save a stranger that led to saving each other. And on those anniversaries, they always end the celebration by watching the sunset from the same hill where Yates and Evelyn are buried, holding hands, remembering that love is built not in grand gestures but in small moments, not in perfection but in choosing each other despite imperfection, not in having everything but in being grateful for what you have. The flood that brought them together was terrifying, destructive, potentially fatal. But from that disaster grew something beautiful, a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that spanned generations, a community that thrived because two people chose to build rather than give up. That is the power of love in action. That is the legacy of Yates and Evelyn Turner. That is the story that deserves to be remembered and told, a reminder that sometimes the worst day of our life is actually the first day of our best life. And so, the story ends where it began, with a flood. But this time, it is not a flood of water but a flood of love, of family, of legacy, sweeping through generations, carrying forward the values and courage of two people who found each other in the midst of disaster and chose to build something beautiful. Yates Turner saved Evelyn Victoria from a flash flood on a summer day in 1876. Evelyn Turner swept Yates off his feet and gave his life meaning beyond land and cattle. Together, they proved that the best love stories are not about perfect people finding each other, but about imperfect people choosing each other, day after day, building a life together one choice at a time. Their story became legend not because it was extraordinary, but because it was true. Real love, lasting love, the kind that changes everything, built on mutual respect, shared values, and the simple daily choice to be partners in all things. That is what they had. That is what they built. That is what they left behind. And that, in the end, is what makes their story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Not because it was easy, but because they chose it. Not because they never faced hardship, but because they faced it together. The cowboy saved her from a flash flood. She swept him off his feet in return. And together, they built a love that outlasted them both, a legacy that continues to inspire, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments, if we are brave enough to see the opportunity in the disaster, the beginning in the ending, the love waiting to be found in the chaos. That is their story, complete and true, a love for the ages.